So thank you all for having me. Thank you for the very warm introduction, Franz. I love you too. It's really, a privilege to be here at this sort of august institution with a room full of people who take this type of work seriously, and I'm very excited to have the opportunity to share some of the vision that drives my work and my career. I think it's a vision that many of us share, and it's not something that I often in my day-to-day life get to talk about because I'm out there building this platform. I'll talk a little bit about the platform at the end, but mostly I want to talk about this vision. So first, just to introduce myself, hi, my name is Josh. I make the internet. Like people who have, most people who have rewarding careers, I work really hard, but I also had a lot of really good luck. And I caught a very lucky break when I was going to NYU studying experimental theater. I had some technical skills too, and so I had a work-study job in the computer lab. And through my work-study job in the computer lab, I met some dot-com dreamer type people there in the late 90s, and started working with them instead of at the computer lab, and basically got in a kind of apprenticeship model brought into the world of open source technology, creating web servers, working with Spark boxes, building databases, and all that kind of stuff. And as it turned out, that was a better way to pay rent than acting. And so I stuck with that after I graduated. I started blogging in 2001, which is a whole different story. And I've been involved in the Drupal project for 15 years now, which isn't quite, I don't know, it makes me feel old. But it's like, having some sort of tenure there. And those were really lucky breaks that kind of helped me get to be where I was today. Another really lucky break was the thing that actually got my career to take off, which was I tried to take over the government. It was in the early 2000s, I was opposed to this idea that we were going to invade Iraq, and I started doing organizing of the kind of classic variety with a bunch of people in New York, and that culminated in this very optimistic afternoon where we managed to get millions of people around the world to demonstrate against this idea in concert. And it was pretty impressive, to be honest. And people who were, moved by that said, this is a historic moment. This is the emergence of global civil society. This is the quote-unquote second superpower. And the people who were actually in charge said, no, it's more of a focus group, so we're going to do our thing. And that was kind of heartbreaking. But the lesson I took away from that was if the people in power are not listening, just sort of going into the street with a placard and demonstrating is not going to be effective. And so I said, we have to change the people in power, so let's start to work on electoral politics. And I found this candidate who happened to be a Yale graduate. I didn't know that at the time, but he named Howard Dean, who was running for the Democratic nomination in 2004. And I found this candidate on the internet. And in particular, I found a speech that he had given at the California State Democratic Convention, in which he started with, what I want to know is what in the world so many Democrats are doing supporting the president's unilateral intervention in Iraq. And he went on to say what he wanted to know, all these other things like why can't we have universal health care and marriage equality and a bunch of other crazy stuff. But he said it loudly and proudly and in a way that I found very inspiring. And the thing is, the California State Democratic Convention is not something that's covered by the news media. But I was able to learn about this because the political blogosphere that I was kind of participating at the time was covering that event. And several years before YouTube was even a thing, people captured video of that event and found ways to share it online. And it really, the campaign started to catch fire after that because it was a message that was resonant with a lot of people who were very frustrated with what was going on at that time. And the campaign said, this might actually work. So they kind of went all in on this Democratic wing of the Democratic Party message and organizing, communicating, and fundraising through the internet. And it was, it took off like a rocket. They went from being, nothing in the polls, like the, governor of Vermont with no name recognition, to actually being serious contenders to win this nomination to challenge another Yaley, George W. Bush. It, of course, did not work out. Rather famously, politics is very wild and crazy. And it's to me, it's just a shame that the Dean Scream moment is the sort of enduring meme of that campaign, because what that campaign actually showed is that when people come together around a common purpose, that the internet has this capacity to allow us to organize and be effective in ways that really can change the world. Nobody that I met who worked on that campaign, whether they actually worked there in an official capacity, a bunch of those people went on to work with a senator from Illinois who did very well for himself, or as active volunteers like me. None of us went back to our old lives after all that was over, because you couldn't. You couldn't have that experience and say, no, we have agency, there's a new way of being, and go back to just whatever your day job was before. And so I have spent my subsequent career trying to take that vision forward. And that vision comes down to, I think what I'm going to speak to is what Franz was trying to articulate before, and it is very difficult to articulate, is like, what is this web thing? Why do we care about it? And to me, it boils down to the notion that connectivity can be a liberating and nurturing force in people's lives, that it can help us be creative, to be generative, not just to learn, but also to share, and that this can help us develop a more just and efficient and pleasant economy, society, and culture. So basically, it comes down to this notion that the internet can be a really big net positive for humanity all over. And that's a vision that a lot of those people who worked on it in the early days definitely, had and still share. And it's not something that's easy to put your finger on, because a vision that's about freedom and creativity and connectivity and humanity, which is an evolving thing, is difficult to pin down. But whether you're talking about the early ethical pioneers of open source who used legal hacks to figure out how not to let corporations completely dominate the fundamental tools that drive this stuff, or the sort of small d democratic ideals of that early political blogosphere, or the sort of online fusion of grassroots and internet activism that the Dean campaign represented, I think those ideals are today best packaged in this notion that we call the open web. And so what I want to do is unpack this idea of what the open web, what we mean when we say the open web. So there's the internet, right? And the internet is sort of it's the platform underneath the open web, right? The internet is the underlying infrastructure that allows all these computers to connect to one another and exchange information. Like, the internet is fundamentally an internet of things, and it powers everything from your email to the online massively multiplayer online game systems, to enterprise resource management systems to track packages and figure out where a bunch of stuff is in the world, to the hundreds of thousands of poorly secured DVR devices that currently comprise the largest known botnet on the internet that can direct huge amounts of denial of service attacks at whatever provider they want. So the internet is all of these things and more. The web is a set of protocols and standards and a specification for how we can publish and link knowledge, and for how machines can mediate the human to computer interface. So really, if you think about it, the internet is the thing that connects computers, and the web is the layer on top of that is designed specifically to connect people, because it's about sharing, linking information, and has standards around how machines mediate that whole experience. And that original design got a number of things just tremendously right? This idea that it would be decentralized, that it would allow any, that was a network of peers, that anyone could link to anything. That was, sort of baked into the design. The notion that there would be rules around how a user agent, or what we now call a web browser, actually requests, retrieves, and displays information to people was hugely important, because it baked some transparency into the core of the system. And when you're talking about a mechanism that's going to be used at internet scale to connect human beings, it's important that it be decentralized and transparent, because the alternative would be, creepy. I think that the web, the open web, describes the best current way we know to connect the world. I think it's better than Facebook at doing that. Facebook's sort of corporate mission is connectivity, and they run a nice service. but frankly, like, you wouldn't want to pick a private commercial social network as your means for connecting the world. It's not a really a good, that's not a good tool for the job, so to speak. You know, there's a lot of, you know, I'm in business myself, and I think it's important that, you know, that businesses have a seat at this table. They're part of the world we need to connect, but we can't prioritize shareholder value over the wider value, because there's a lot of value at stake. There's an enormous amount of excitement and potentially also some hype around things like machine learning and artificial intelligence these days. You probably hear about it a lot here. I definitely hear about it all the time in Silicon Valley. And it's real, it's cool. There's a bunch of great stuff that is possible now and becoming more possible that was pretty hard to do before. But I'm personally far, far more excited about the potential to connect the 7 or 8 billion human brains that exist on the planet, the computational power that exists within all of us, if it were able to effectively communicate, coordinate, and collaborate, is, to me, you know, orders of magnitude more impactful than what you can do by having a lot of computers in the cloud do linear algebra really quickly to optimize images and so forth. And I think that what we've seen with open source, which is, I think, the tip of the iceberg in terms of how the wealth of networks can be used to create public goods via the internet, we'll see more and more and more things like that, I hope, that as a result of people being able to collaborate and producing and sharing knowledge, as Franz said. There's a huge amount of value yet to be created. And I think this vision is very important because when I think about not just the value, but also the challenges we face, think about the existential problems that exist that we all need to be worried about or are worried about. They are global problems, and they demand global solutions. We have to be able to work together to find our way through the challenges that we're going to face in the decades to come, and to do that in a way that is, again, of, by, and for the people is incredibly important. I want this connectivity that we are creating to be something that is joyful, that is liberating, that is positive, that people find, you know, not an oppressive force that kind of runs their lives for them or just makes them feel like they're constantly missing out on stuff. And I think, you know, I have to be honest that for myself and for many of the people that I met in those sort of exciting early days, we were a little naive, frankly, about how much of an ethical message was baked into the system, right? There was this general belief that if, you know, people just connected, it would all work out because we're going to be transparent and accountable and decentralized, and so it has to have a good outcome. And that was frankly, in retrospect, very naive. What the internet and what the web lets us do is reflect upon ourselves faster and faster and faster than ever before. And in the sense of the medium being the message, what the web lets us do is remix, mash up, combine, and alter ourselves. And as more and more of humanity starts running more and more with the web, it means that humanity and culture and society and our economy can be remixed and mashed up and hacked in ways that maybe might not always be positive. There are things that are embedded in this medium that actually lend themselves to the potential for deception or at least confusion, right? The medium of the web has the notion that the same universal resource, the same URL, universal resource locator, can actually display different things depending on what device you're looking on it with, or whether or not your request for what's there bears a cookie that says, show me the version of this for technologists versus show me the version of this for academics. And so the medium itself contains the seeds of some of the things that I think we struggle with a lot today. And it's disturbing to think that potentially we're out here crafting the mechanisms of our own, you know, destruction or building our own prison, so to speak. But it's something that we need to take seriously. Like, again, the printing press as the metaphor, I think this was the latent, unspoken, collective unconscious metaphor that we were all going to be the 21st century Ben Franklins. We were going to be inventors and publishers and storytellers and raconteurs, and we were going to, bring the revolution to the world. And what we didn't really think about, or I actually cannot remember a single person talking about at the time, like back in the day, was that with the introduction of movable type printing to Western society, the immediate result was 100 years of terrible religious warfare. And that's actually kind of frightening to reflect upon. But what actually, what history teaches us is that, yes, there's a huge amount of correlation between access to information and the spread of knowledge and progress and development. But when you have traditional structures for managing information and managing authority that break down, there's also tends to be a lot of conflict that results in that. Because when things are up for grabs, people start to grab at one another. And I've been giving versions of this talk for a few years in my career and trying to work this stuff out as I go in front of different audiences. And I used to do, the first version of this just went printing press slide, Renaissance slide. It was like, it's just going to happen, folks. And it's not just going to happen, but there is this potential, which I think is an important thing to hold on to. There is this potential that as we connect the world, as we allow people to share more easily, as we create, disseminate, and archive more and more knowledge, and we actually find our way through the competing voices and the cacophony towards truth, towards beauty, towards things that make our lives better, that we will make a lot of people's lives better, that we will have a better world for ourselves, for our children, that we will usher in a new era for humanity that will be looked back upon with positive connotations. So the potential is really there. It's just not a foregone conclusion. We're in an era where meaning itself is kind of up for grabs. The buzzword du jour is epistemic crisis. And in a world where meaning is up for grabs, institutions like this are more important than ever. And I think for all the people in the room, you supporting people in the room, we're all supporting people to do good, to find truth, to create knowledge. There's an incredible moment to be risen to for institutions like Yale. And the academy in general has been, I would say, for my adult life, kind of cloistered. This notion of, the biggest way in which universities enter the public discourse is often sort of flashpoints around like undergraduate angst as a kind of proxy front in some broader culture war, instead of like the actual stuff that we're doing and the knowledge that we're creating. And I think it is vital that institutions like Yale find their public voice again, and the medium that will allow them to do that will be the web. The potential here is enormous. But the peril is also very enormous, because in a time of epistemic crisis, right, where meaning itself is up for grabs, the control over data, the control over the flow of information is more and more powerful than it ever was before. And people, regular people every day who maybe we are all addicted to our phones, we're more and more vulnerable to manipulation. And so it's a time when we have to really return to this vision of the open web as something that is meant to be empowering for all of us, not just for a small set of master manipulators or the holders of all the world's information. It's very important that we remember this democratic notion of the open web as something that is a connection of peers, versus just a tool that is used that has consumers and producers. I think that despite the fact that the moment we live in now is fraught and very difficult, we've certainly seen that the web is not inherently good. The internet absolutely can be used for evil and will. We're going to go forward. We don't have to go forward. You can always have another dark age, right? Maybe you get the printing press and you get like 100 years of religious warfare, and like they never figure out how to find peace, and that warfare never ends, and it just grinds itself back down into another century or 5 of nothing actually progressing. I don't want that to happen. I think the only way out is through. We must find our way through the challenges that we face as technologists, as professionals, as citizens, as humans. And even though it is uncomfortable, move forward with what we have going on to the future that we all want. It would be a huge mistake to turn to the high-tech companies or to the current some of the closed web platforms and look to them to actually solve this problem. You don't want, again, shareholder value to be the primary determinator of how the web actually works. There's a role to be played there, but it's not the central one. You also don't really want to turn to the state to solve these problems either. In China, they're performing a massive social experiment on exactly how the web and the internet can be used to control people, and the gloves are off. It's like, if you look at some of the things that are actually being done, it's like every other episode of Black Mirror is being worked out in real life. And we're going to see what the results are. And I expect there will be some that are good and some that are not. But it's not a path that I would advocate us following if we have the choice. So I don't think that we can look to the high-tech companies to solve this problem for us. I don't think you can really look to state actors to solve this problem for us. Again, our problems are global problems, and we want to be involved in solving them ourselves. We can't just wait for the nations to do it for us. I think what we have to do is return to that original vision, and we, the people, need to actually solve this problem, solve these problems. It's not a singular thing. By pursuing the vision of the open web as a place where people can connect, people can share, where there is accountability and there is transparency, and we muddle our way forward as human beings, as we always do. There's not a technological fix to this. It's a human challenge. And recognizing it as such and as a challenge that we all have a role to play, I actually think we can do it. And I think we just have to recognize that it is, in fact, up to us and not for some higher authority to fix on our behalf. That's not to say that all of the technology companies don't have a role to play. They all should do better in the parlance of our times. They need to recognize that they have a real, they've reaped enormous benefits from all this. They also have enormous responsibilities. Obviously, governments matter, laws matter. We need the government to not spy on us. We need the government to protect our privacy. We need the government to protect things like net neutrality in order to retain this kind of open and level playing field that's been so revolutionary and driven so much innovation and prosperity already. But again, they're not going to fix it. To pick another cliche, the eternal vigilance is the price of liberty. If we actually want to be free, it's an awful lot of work. And that's what makes this whole thing really hard, is that it's very complicated. There's a whole lot of layers of technology involved. And taking ownership over that, which is what's required if we are to be free. If we're to be free, we have to own our own data, we have to publish ourselves, and we have to know what code is doing in our systems, and we need to be able to inspect that. That's a huge amount of responsibility and something that no single individual can really do in their lives. It's not possible for any one person to completely control all the information going in and out of their lives at this point. So we have to work on this together. Another more contemporary reference I like to use to explain this is the Game of Thrones. Show of hands, who here is familiar with the world of Game of Thrones? Okay, great. So the Greyjoys, right? They're, for anybody who isn't familiar with this, Game of Thrones, wizards, knights, dragons. These people are kind of like the pirates of this world. They live on an island. They mostly go out and raid for things. Their whole culture is built upon this notion that they pillage instead of doing anything. Their motto is we don't sow, we don't plant food, we just steal it from other people. And then in their culture, they have this notion of there's anything that can be gotten with two prices: a gold price and an iron price. And the gold price means you paid gold for it, you paid money and you bought something. And the iron price, which is much more favored in this kind of macho universe, is you took it by the sword. Here we have Old Man Greyjoy. There, he's the scion of the he's the head of the household. You've got his daughter Yara, who's actually a total badass and should probably be running things, but she's the daughter. And then you've got Theon over there on the left, who's sort of useless. And I like to imagine this setting as Yara's coming in and saying to Theon's like, I'm going to do it all by myself. I'm just going to set up some servers and connect them to the internet, and it's all going to work out just fine. And Yara's coming over like, Theon, do you realize that like as soon as you connect the thing to the internet, within the first 24 hours, it's going to have like 15,000 dictionary attacks on every possible like login, and every port on your system is going to be scanned. Are you prepared to maintain and defend that LAMP stack indefinitely? And like, he's not. And Old Man Greyjoy is just like sitting there thinking, maybe this will finally be the year of Linux on the desktop. And it won't. And the reason for this is that open source and the open web and doing these things, it carries with it a very real iron price, right? Because it's not something that we're just getting from a company, you can't just pay for it. You have to actually do it. It requires work. It requires effort. And the challenge is that if, as currently configured, if you just sort of throw the code at people, most people are rightly completely unprepared to pay that iron price. They're not going to get a server, they're not going to install some stuff, they're not going to set it up, or even if they do figure out how to do all that, they're going to get brutally owned within the first month that thing is online, and they'll be part of some botnet, or somebody will be using their CPUs to mine bitcoins. And so it's the job of myself and the job of all of us to help sort of ameliorate that intense iron price that comes with actually having your own website and doing your own publishing. This is the notion that we want to empower. The architecture we want is the posse architecture, which is publish yourself. And then, syndicate out to whatever services are valuable and useful for further dissemination. But by publishing yourself, you then own and control the source of your knowledge, of your voice. And that's incredibly important. And with your thing about whether stuff's going out into social media or into some academic system, it really kind of should be published first by the people who create the knowledge and not into some other kind of proprietary network. And then maybe if you're lucky, you can put an embed or an abstract on your own website. This is the architecture and the sort of model that we're here to support. We want this to be revolutionary. We want this to be liberatory. And the important thing for me that I've learned, or I'm learning through my career, is that the really revolutionary moments happen when technology fades into the background of the story. Right? As somebody who's made a career in technology, I'm excited by all the new things and everything that's bleeding edge, cutting edge, because that's where you can kind of guess at what might have a future revolutionary impact. But when you look at the actual revolutionary impacts and when they start to happen, they occur when the technology itself is no longer the story. They occur when what we are doing as humans with the technology becomes a very interesting story. And that's what I want to be able to support for all of you at Yale, and that you can all support for the fine folks here who you work with. We were talking about this last night. It's platforms all the way down, as it were. I build Pantheon, but Pantheon uses Google's cloud. Google's cloud is based on Linux, and there's Yale Sites is becoming a platform in and of itself that's built on top of mine. And you all are using Yale Sites to create a platform for the folks who you support to publish themselves, to disseminate their knowledge into the world. And so together, if we can find the right way to actually support one another, that fairly steep cost of being on the open web and owning and controlling your own destiny there can actually be paid if we do it collectively in the right way. We just have to find the right ways to coordinate. So an example of this that I'll give as a specific, Franz alluded to before, Pantheon, in addition to putting your websites in the cloud and so forth, also integrates a global content distribution network. And what that means is we work to deploy instances in more than 50 locations around the world that can actually hold your content so that it can be delivered very quickly from that location to someone who wants to see it. And that's super important if you have an international audience. I imagine many people at Yale do. Yale itself as an institution certainly does. Like Franz was sharing a story with me where the dean of the College of Arts and Sciences was visiting on a the president or the prime minister of Ghana and wanted to show him something that they had recently published, and it was this kind of embarrassing experience where it like took forever to load, and they just said, okay, well, we'll look at it later, right? That shouldn't happen. But I think even more importantly, these devices that we're all so in love with, the expectation of what the web needs to be, the expectations are set so much higher by the way these devices work. If I tap on something on my phone and I don't see it, within like maybe 2 seconds, I'm gone, right? I'm just going to tab away to something else. And one of the things that many people on the web struggle with is to meet those expectations for responsiveness and performance. This technology guarantees that you're able to do that, because what we're able to do is do the secure HTTPS negotiation and deliver the content from some place that could be, in the same state, if not the same city, as the person doing the viewing. And that's how you get that kind of lightning fast response. And it used to be that this type of setup was like pretty rare air. It was a pretty enterprisey thing to be able to do. You had to like buy a really expensive service provider and then do a ton of work to integrate it with your website, because it gets to be kind of complicated if you're storing many copies of things all around the world. Like, how do you make sure they stay in sync? Yada, yada, yada. Like, everybody's had the experience of like, just clear the cache one more time and hopefully it'll show up. That now multiply that by 50, it could go very wrong. But what we do at Pantheon is we try to solve these problems in a way that is consistent and basically bulletproof and works out of the box for everybody. So we're not doing kind of bespoke, let's figure out how your website can get distributed globally, and then we'll do this one over here. We just make it happen as a platform so that you don't have to think about it. It's just there. It's now just, we've raised everyone's expectations, and good for us. That's really our mission. Our mission is to help you focus more and more on the impact that you want to have, and less about the specific technologies or technology challenges that you might be wrestling with. There's always going to be interesting technology stuff, but our motto, one of our early mottos at Pantheon, is we want to put the human being at the top of the stack, right? The human mind is not well suited to repetitive, sort of drudgy kind of work, server maintenance, for instance. The human mind is creative, the human mind is generative, the human mind is pattern matching and problem solving. And so what we strive to do is to use computers at the repetitive drudge work, which they're very good at, and liberate the people to focus their creative energy where there's strategic value. And I believe that with that type of liberated mental capacity and people focusing on creativity and the strategic value of what it is they're trying to do, that we can play our own small part in trying to help this vision of a renaissance led by the internet and led by the web to come to be. It won't happen if we're all just like fiddling with our servers over there, because that's not what's important. What's important is getting technology to recede from the story and getting us engaged as human beings with one another to unite and connect to the world and build a better tomorrow. So that's my talk. Thanks for listening, and I'm happy to answer any questions you might have. Oh, yeah, please clap.